It was really successful from the point of view of we got there,
Right.
and we got an offer on the table, and the offer in fact was for £80 million, so not a small amount of money. But unfortunately, the business owner, in his wisdom, decided that he didn't want to take the offer and he wanted more. It was against the advice he'd been given, but he was quite adamant that he could get and would get more. So we turned the offer down, basically.
And did he subsequently sell it for more?
And then there was a property crash,
Right. Oh God. Right.
and the business came out in a very different format to what it had been before the property crash. So that 80 million offer was, a fantastic offer. Probably would have set him up for life. But after that, he really got very little, if anything, out of the business. I think the biggest one is the owner involvement. So if you're running a business, it could be very profitable, you could be making lots of money from it, but if you're involved in driving the pipeline, running the marketing, delivering some of the service, relationship with clients, it's you're running the business, everything's dependent on you, and that is the number one killer of a deal, or the number one killer of value. It's owner involvement.
Hi, Damian. Welcome to the podcast. Great to see you.
Delighted to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
It's great. Now, for those who don't know you, you seem to me to be all over LinkedIn. Every time I open my LinkedIn feed, you are there. You're sort of producing quite a lot of content. But for those that haven't engaged with you yet or seen the stuff you do, let's start by, if you don't mind, sharing a bit about your background story, what's brought you here today, and I kind of want to say what makes you qualified to advise SME and business owners specifically.
Okay. So in terms of my background, I like to think, others might not agree, but I like to think it makes me the accountant I am today, and hopefully the accountant that's a little bit different to what people normally expect. So I guess if we go back to the very start, when I was in school in Dublin, it was a more interesting time than it is now. It was certainly pre-Celtic Tiger, and I wanted to be a historian.
Right.
Historians in Ireland were very far and few between, and given it was pre-Celtic Tiger, there really wasn't the opportunity to do that. So my parents were telling me from a very young age, you need to get a qualification, because you need something should you decide to leave Ireland, which lots of people at that time did. So I became an accountant, not a historian. And so that was the start of my journey. Once I left school, I didn't go to university. Again, it was different times. You had to pay for the university tuition and all of the costs, and we just didn't have the funds to do that without taking a year or two off. So I went straight into an accountancy practice in Dublin, small practice, 3-partner firm, and that's where I learned all the basics of, how to do compliance, how to do things the right way, how to focus on detail, how to meet people. So people would come into the office with their box of receipts, and you got to meet different types of people with different types of challenges and different humours on them on a particular day. So it was a good grounding. So I finished my ACCA exams, and as I wasn't going to be a partner and I wasn't really keen to stay in Ireland because the opportunities weren't there, it was at that stage that I took my parents' advice and I moved abroad. So there was a friend of mine working in the Isle of Man at that time. And the Isle of Man is a little bit different to what it was today. It was a hotbed of tax planning, offshore tax advice and trusts, because non-dom planning from a tax point of view was much bigger than it is today. So the opportunities were to work in banks, insurance houses, trust and tax planning, accountancy firms. So I went over and joined a small tax planning and trust advisory business, and that was where I had my first commercial role, and I was working within a team where we worked with some interesting clients.
Okay.
So some of the tax planning structures that we worked within and put together for clients included things such as buying EFL football teams.
As part of a tax planning.
As part of a tax planning or a tax structuring element for foreign investors usually. We also were involved in helping Gulf Royals buy prime property in London. And then because there was a lot of UK non-domiciled who could take advantage of tax laws that were available then, there were a lot of second generation English citizens from Africa or Asia or other parts of Europe were able to quite legally sell their business shares, hold property, all in offshore structures, sometimes involving trusts. So we're involved in quite a number of interesting projects. And probably the biggest one, of the most interesting today, is we're involved in the transfer of a coal mine in Czechia from public ownership to private ownership. Perfectly legal under the laws at that time in that country, but really interesting because the reasoning by the clients was that they wanted to keep that coal mine out of German hands, because they would have shut it down and there would have been 10,000 local jobs lost. I think they were probably interested in the money they were going to make once the mine was privatized as well.
Interesting. So, I mean, that already sounds like a pretty rich and varied sort of early stage of your career. But if I look at what you're doing now in our past conversations and certainly the content you're creating, you're running an accounting, tax planning, accounting business now. And you seem to have a real key focus on SME, small business owners, preparing for an exit. Is that how you describe the business now?
Yeah, I'd call it planning for an exit or being exit ready. That's the way I term it. And also, it's about building an asset. Many people run a business and they earn from a business, and they might run it for 10 or 20 years. But sometimes after 10 or 20 years, it still isn't actually worth anything significant to a third party. And so part of the reason behind that is that having spent 10 or 20 years running that business and it being very successful, why wouldn't you put a little bit of extra effort or thought to then turn it into something that might give you a life-changing sum at the end of that 10 or 20 years as well?
Yeah, I find this really interesting. So you focus on that. Yeah, I know you do other things, but you do focus quite a bit on that specific sector. And I'm just, why is that? I know you've had other experiences in other corporates and other businesses with different types of, or different outcomes. But is that more recent experience, is that what led you to set up and do what you do today? What's your focus on pre-exit SMEs?
I think it's an area that I quite enjoy working in. I think it's also an area that's quite underserved. There's lots of business brokers out there. I think there's lots of M&A advisors who will tell you they can sell the business, and they'll sell the business, and this is what it'll cost you to sell the business. But what they won't tell you is you're missing out on a big chunk of value. If you do this, this, and this, and this, we can sell it for more, or you can get more out of it. And I think accountants, by their nature, I think you touched on it earlier, by their nature are very, for the most part, very transactional. Or for those that aren't transactional, there's those who are doing the management accounts, the budgets, helping business owners grow the business over a period of time. But I think unless you've got experience of going through an exit process, and also experience maybe being on the other side, which gives you a great picture of how it all works and how the politics work, and etc., I don't think you can really help a business prepare for that.
Interesting. I'm going to come back to that and my views and my own experiences on the wonderful accounting profession, because it is quite interesting, the way that a lot of business owners are advised. But we were chatting earlier, and you said something about there was a company that you were working for that was really scaling up, building towards what looked like a really significant exit at one point. Share a little bit about that story, what went on and what the eventual outcome was.
Yeah, so after my Isle of Man experience, I wanted to travel the world a little bit. So I went to Australia. I worked for a couple of corporates there on short-term contracts. I traveled through Asia for a period of time. And then I came back to London. And then after six or 8 months of being in London, I got a job in a property business. Now, this property business initially was just 2 companies based out of London, turning over about £4 to £5 million per annum. And then over the next 3.5 years, it turned into, I think it was 18 limited companies in 4 different jurisdictions. And then it was employing around about 250 people between permanent employees and contractors. So really, really substantial growth, fantastic scaling, a really sales-focused business. And then for me personally, I got a lot of experience in dealing with salespeople, the sales mindset, but also how you need to grow with the business and how the business needs to grow with the sales and the opportunities that are coming in the front door. So having dealt with a lot of that, having put a team in place to manage all of the compliance, all of the day-to-day, management team in place, supporting the management team with all of the information they need, eventually the owner got to a point where he said, I want to sell the business. And given the kind of character he was, very salesy, not that interested in admin or what was required to keep things ticking over from an ops point of view, he said, I want to sell the business in the next 6 to 9 months. Right. Now, typically, I would say you need to be thinking about exiting or selling your business, 3, 4, 5 years ahead of time. In practice, I'd say you need to be working on it 2 years ahead of time. So to do it in 6 or 9 months in a business that had grown as fast as that had was really, really challenging. But at the same time, it's a really good challenge for someone to take on. And so over that 6 or 9 months, we went through, a really exciting, challenging, stressful period of trying to get everything in order so that you could present something to a buyer or to your business broker and your M&A advisors that a buyer would look at and be able to do their due diligence on and come back and say, actually, there is something here that I'd like to spend some money on.
And was this sale successful in 6 to 9 months?
It was really successful from the point of view of we got there.
Right.
And we got an offer on the table. And the offer, in fact, was for £80 million, so not a small amount of money. Right. But unfortunately, the business owner, in his wisdom, decided that he didn't want to take the offer and he wanted more. It was against the advice he'd been given, but he was quite adamant that he could get and would get more. So he turned the offer down, basically.
And did he subsequently sell it for more?
And then there was a property crash.
Right. Oh, God. Right.
And the business came out in a very different format to what it had been before the property crash. So that 80 million offer was, a fantastic offer. Probably would have set him up for life. But after that, he really got very little, if anything, out of the business.
God, it just shows you that is, I guess a sad story, but it just shows you sometimes, the a bird in the hand and all the rest of it. You get an offer. It always quite intrigues me that how founders arrive at their own valuation. I mean, looking back on that, basically, you were one of the numbers guys within the business. Did an offer of 80 million to you seem like a reasonable valuation for the business at the time? Did you think it was underpriced?
Well, I have to admit, I wasn't involved at that level, at a negotiation or roadshow level. We had a group financial director who was doing that side of things, but I was putting everything together and having discussions with him. If I said that he spit out his coffee when he heard he turned it down, I think that probably tells you everything. So, a business that had grown that fast, that had gone through a period of very little structure, we were able to pull it together so the story held together, and we were able to manage the due diligence, because there were some things that they just couldn't go back and check in detail, but we were able to show a sensible story, show a direction of travel, and it meant then that we were able to get a really good offer that, frankly, would have been difficult to get elsewhere.
I've heard a version of that story quite a few times now, where an offer's on the table, depending on the business, often, the founders will often have a much more positive view on their business. They think, I started it, I grew it, and there's a lot more upside potential, so I'll hold off, and I think I'll secure a better offer. And unfortunately, I mean, sometimes they can, sometimes they do, and they get a bigger and better offer down the line. But in quite a few occasions that I've come across, and this obviously is a pretty significant example of it, then that offer, that was the peak. That was the best offer you're going to get. And it's always quite difficult to work out. Obviously, everyone should do, if it's their kind of life's work, they should maximize the valuation. But sometimes being perhaps a little bit more pragmatic, identifying...
Yeah, I mean, any sale process, there will be a negotiation phase. So that's the time to test your negotiation skills, or to test the higher level or the lower levels. But I think a lot of it's about trying to set the scene at the start.
Yeah.
So again, when I'm working with clients, one of the first things I do is I try and set out the framework at the very start. So try and get a picture of where the business is, and maybe give an indicative picture as to what I think it might be worth versus what the owner thinks. And obviously, if there's a big difference, well, then that's a good starter for 10, because at least you're having that discussion 2 or 3 years out, not 2 or 3 weeks before you're
Well,
hoping
I
to
think
sell
that's I think that's the point, or one of the points that I guess some of the work that you and your colleagues will do would ideally help to bridge that gap. If the owner's got this idea and you say, well, realistically, that's high based on market valuations right now, but there are things that you can do to get you closer to that ideal valuation. So I was going to sort of alluded to it a moment or two ago. I work with a lot of business owners, as you do, Damian, and often one of the earlier conversations I have is, tell me about your relationship with your accountant. And I have to say, and I'm not trying to paint an entire profession, but it does seem to be exactly that you've sort of described, is that accountants often are excellent. They're great at tax compliance. They're great at filing your tax return on time and keeping you, on the right side of HMRC and the rest of it. But strategic planning, forward thinking, reverse engineering a great exit, it seems to be, my experience anyway, maybe I'm missing out on this, but it's not a core part of a lot of accountancy business. I mean, do you know why is that? Is that just the nature of the beast with accountants? Hi, just a quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit subscribe and leave a rating or a review. It's honestly the best way to support the show, to help more people find it, and to make sure that future episodes get even better based on your feedback. Thanks for being here, and now back to the show.
Well, if I could be challenging in some respect, I'd start off with saying, what is an accountant?
Right.
There isn't actually a definition of what an accountant is. So what an accountant is in practice is, they're an advisor, they're the guy who submits your tax return, they're the guy who helps you plan for your exit, they're the guy who gets the numbers in front of you, they're the guy who fixes your systems. Invariably, an accountant will be involved in putting in a new finance system or a CRM system. Invariably, they're involved in your processes. So there are very, very different skill sets involved in that. And so I think what it comes down to, every accountant is trained in a certain way to be organized, to be detail driven, to look at deadlines, to work towards deadlines, to get things right. And it's only through experience that I think you add those additional skills. So you have to have the experience of dealing with C-suite management teams, dealing with sales teams, with marketing teams, with operational teams, with customer service teams, which will then round you out a little bit, or it'll give you a bit more insight into some of the numbers you're generating, or some of the value, or the use for some of those numbers that you're generating. So in some respect, I'd say it's a little bit unfair that accountants are tarnished in the way they are, because there are different kinds.
Right.
If you spend 20 years delivering compliance, delivering things on time, making sure everything is accurate for business owners, because that's the basics.
Yeah.
Every business owner needs the basics done, but then maybe need a slightly different person to do, the more business commercial side of things. But again, you can only do that through experience. And then for that strategy piece, you have to have experience, I think, to be able to add that strategy element. So if you've not worked in a number of different businesses, if you've not worked in different jurisdictions, in different sectors, been involved in different projects, some of which have gone well or some that haven't gone well, then that's what gives you the strategic experience and the ability then to be able to say, Mr. Business Owner, I don't think you should do that, because one time when I was working with this business owner, we did this and it didn't work. Right. Or sometime, or on another occasion, we worked with this business owner and it worked fantastically well. So
is it the case, do you think, based on your experience, that a lot of business owners aren't necessarily thinking about exit strategy? I mean, some are for sure. I know some started a business from day one with a plan to exit, but a lot of others are thinking about, this month, this quarter, trying to grow a company, trying to sort of defend themselves from all the inevitable challenges.
Yeah.
Is that your experience, that a lot of business owners aren't necessarily thinking, well, in 5 years, I'll probably wish to exit, or I want to at least get in shape such that I could have that as an option? Do you come across that quite regularly?
I think business owners have that idea. It crosses their mind. But I think 3 to 5 years is a long time for most people, and especially for business owners when they've got so many things to juggle. It crosses their mind and they say, yes, I'll come back to that. And then maybe they don't, or maybe they do 2 months beforehand when they're saying, actually, I want to exit now. And so 3 to 5 years is great. It makes things easier if you're an advisor to then take them through the steps, small steps at a time, which then can accelerate over a period of time. But the reality is probably 2 years, if they're going to think about it seriously, it's going to be somewhere between 18 months and 2 years before they want to go. And that's probably the minimum, because that's when you can have a bit of flexibility around maybe some tax planning, maybe get your IFA or wealth manager then to sit down and say, well, you need a little bit of time to pull all this together to give you, the pension or the retirement that you're looking for. But 3 to 5 years is probably what everyone would ideally state as the definition, and as in the book. The reality is, I think if you can get someone really seriously taking some action, 18 months to 2 years, that's what happens in practice.
I often see this 3 to 5 years, and it's always 3 to 5 years, and every year that goes past, it's still 3 to 5 years. As the time period gets extended.
Yeah,
I think, and it's just the concept of doing that, because again, my own experiences are that a lot of business owners aren't thinking about an exit, but to my mind, it's just, if you can get yourself in a position where you've got a really, really, really attractive business, that just makes good commercial sense. Anyway, there are things that we can all do to improve profitability, focus on, cutting overhead and a bunch of other stuff that you would do anyway, even if you didn't sell. You're just, you're a better business than you were before. So it's that kind of strategic thinking, consulting type role that I think is really valuable. One of the reasons I connected with you earlier on was because you're one of the few people I've come across that actually, focuses on that and does it. So it's that concept of begin with the end in mind, and then give yourself time, because no one's got the time to do all the things that you should do in 6 months, because there's often a lot of things to do. Just pivoting slightly just for a second, you mentioned tax planning. We're all aware, anyone in business right now is aware of the sort of the current tax regime for business owners in the UK, and it certainly doesn't appear to be getting any easier right now. In terms of just day-to-day and kind of profit extraction and paying yourself, I mean, are there any current thoughts or evolving thoughts in light of the current situation, the sort of current tax regime that's in place for business owners? What are the smart people doing to extract profits, to pay themselves, to sort of take money out of the company while they can? Any thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts really are around, it's limited.
Right.
There aren't too many options in terms of taking money out of your business that are going to, give you a silver bullet. But again, it goes back to planning for an exit. I would say my answer to that question is work out how much you want or how much you need. Start with that. And then once you know what you want to take out of the business, then you can look at what's the most tax efficient way to do it based on, option A, option B, option C. But I think starting a conversation saying what's the most tax efficient way to take money out, I think it's the wrong way of looking at it.
Right.
Just as I would say about, planning an exit, look at where you are, look at where you want to go to, and then work the plan from there. So it doesn't really answer your question.
But I guess it's still, I'm wondering if there's any sort of magic bullet that I've missed, but I don't think there is. It's kind of predominantly still, despite the kind of the slightly less tax favorable situation now, it still often is dividends, that you pay yourself a dividend.
Salary, dividends, pension.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot more than that,
right.
other than having the right level or the right amounts within your earnings.
Yeah.
There are other factors at play as well. So again, if you're focused on tax planning, you might have a really, really small salary. But what that might mean is when you come to buy your first property, or you move into a bigger property, then you run into problems because a lot of your lenders that you'd like to go with won't lend on the salary you've got. So again, it comes back to plan what you need to take out of the business, and then if there are changes, if you're going to buy a property, go on maternity, if something's going to happen in your life, then we say tell us about it, and then we can change the mix of how we do things with you. So that seems a more holistic and a more practical and sensible way of doing it.
And that seems to be like a recurring theme here. What is it you actually want? Let's not focus on the input. Let's just decide what the outcome is that you really want, and let's be a bit fluid and flexible around designing the ideal strategy.
Because again, I've talked about I worked offshore for a period of time, and it was very popular for people to get tax planning advice. And the best tax planning advice for UK non-doms was give everything you own to your spouse, because if they are non-domiciled, then there was very little inheritance tax or capital gains tax, and you might even sort of shelter some income tax. But in practice, you then own nothing.
Right.
What happens if you get divorced? What happens if the spouse has an affair? What happens if something goes wrong? Then your house, the ownership of your business, everything. So it's great tax planning. It's tax planning number one.
Yeah.
But actually, from a practical point of view, it's pretty terrible from a lifestyle.
Yeah, I
point
can
of view.
imagine it could have some fairly negative impacts.
Yeah. So again, I really think tax planning is brilliant, but I think it's tax planning within a framework of this is what I want or this is what I need, and then what are the options within that framework. That's the best tax planning in my view.
Makes sense. All right, let's get into the weeds then about this, because I know this is an area that you focus on. It's kind of what you do day to day, a lot of your work. So imagine you are speaking to a business owner, a founder who, comes to you and says, I am in that magical 3 to 5 years. I'm not exactly sure when. It's not next year. It's not 10 years, but it's probably about 3 to 5 years. What are the key steps that you begin to recommend that they start to focus on, to fix, to do, to improve?
Well, we've got a nascent program or a plan for business owners in that space. And it's sort of three steps. Clarify, so understand where you are, where you're going, put a plan in place. Optimize, which is then work on the plan over the next 12, 18, 20, 24 months. Get all those processes, systems, get yourself out of the business. And then the accelerate element, which is then bring in the brokers, start looking for your buyer, tweak things in the business to make sure that you're appealing to those buyers. So really the first point is, let's have a look at your business. Let's get a sense of what you think the value is. Let's get a sense as to whether that's realistic, and then sit down and say, what is it you want? When do you want it? And how are we going to get there? And that's a really good starting point for any business owner.
Okay. So once you do, so they say, I want to exit in 3 years, and my number is, I'll make it up, 10 million pounds. So you just have a look at it, and based on your knowledge and experience, you say, I think the business is worth about 5 million now, or whatever the numbers are. So there's that gap.
Yeah,
right?
or I might say, I think the business is only worth 1 million,
right,
and you want 10. So the next question is, have you had a chat to your IFA?
Right.
Why did you come up with 10? And they might say, well, it's a nice number. It's, my mate down at the pub sold for 10 million. I'd like to, and he bought a nice Ferrari. I'd like to do the same thing. So one of the first things I'd say is, well, why don't you go and have a chat to your IFA? Because he or she will sit you down and go, well, what's your plan for the next 25 years? Are you planning to live off a yacht in the Mediterranean? Are you planning to travel? And then work out what you need. And then that will give you a picture as to whether you need 10. Because also, if your business is only worth 1 and you're trying to get to 10, how many years' work is that going to take to get there? Whereas if you come back and say, actually, I need 3, 5 would be brilliant. Then you might say, well, actually, we only need 3 years, based on where you are today, based on the trajectory of the business. It might be 3 years to get to that number,
right?
And that might change the whole mindset of the business owner. So they're saying, well, I know I want a 10, and you might tell me I need to spend 5 years on it. Actually, I just need 3 years. I can get to 5. 5 is more than comfortable lifestyle. So then you've got your framework in place, and then you work the plan from there to say, what do we need to do over the next month, 2 months, 6 months, 9 months to get you to your 5 million.
So it's really interesting. I must say, I don't do much at all self-promotion on this podcast. It's not about me. It's about the guests and their experience and the resources they can share. But I think that's an interesting thing you've flagged up. In my experience, not every wealth advisor does this, but in my firm we certainly do, which is back to this concept of reverse engineering. A well-known phrase or question is what's my number? What's your number? Because again, my own personal experience, people do make up these numbers. I want 10 million, but why? And it's always some other story.
Well, I've actually got experience with that. Someone made up their number, and a deal that was perfectly acceptable would have set them up for life.
Your 80 million
didn't
deal,
actually happen because they just had the wrong number in mind, and they had the wrong. Well, they weren't listening to advice, or they hadn't taken the advice that they were given. So, I always like to start the business owner on the right foot, which is, what are you aiming for? What's your number? But why? and then how long is it going to take you to get to that number? Because sometimes that can change the whole basis of the discussion.
Yeah, I get that, and I think a good, working. This is the idea of creating a team, which I want to talk about in a minute. But with a very good financial planner, that's and good accountants, I think, do this as well. Is really trying to cross the bridge between the business focus, because a lot of people just focus on the business. What's the business worth? What's your P&L? What's your growth? What's your trajectory? All that stuff. But behind every founder, or most of them at least, there's a family, there's a spouse, there's a set of circumstances. So you begin to plot some of those things and tell me, what would you do after you sell? And it depends. As you say, if you like sailing, glamorous yachts, then the number is probably going to need to be a bit bigger. If you like going for nice walks in the countryside, that's what you're going to be spending your time doing. The number's going to be different. So let's sort of begin to plot the personal, the family, the lifestyle, and try to map that across the business valuation. And again, in my experience, I've seen it where you're already there, but you're kind of holding on for another 3 or 5 years, but based on your expectations. And then there's sort of a secondary level of things at play where people say, yes, I know I'm there, but I really think this company's got potential. So, which is, again, perfectly fine. But I think really understanding that in depth, how much do you need? Because I think if I was to summarize why you'd want to exit in an ideal world, it's the concept of financial independence.
Yeah.
Right. You got financial freedom. I've now got sufficient liquid capital to live the life that I choose to live. Whatever. And often these entrepreneurs will go back and start another business, which again, fair enough.
Yeah.
But they don't have to, and they've got an option. They can do any number of different things. But working out, what the sort of financial resources required in order to fund that for the rest of your life, I think are good. So I think working hand in hand with, good forward-thinking strategic accounting, tax advising firms, and a good financial planner can often, pay dividends to at least begin to focus on that number, or that approximate number, and then kind of work it back from there. So you would take them through that process as a 3 to 5 year, and then you begin to focus on how do we. I guess there's two things that's going to impact a valuation. One is revenue. Revenue and profits are going to make it. Obviously, there's lots of other things, but as a starter for 10. You begin to focus on those things. I guess, how can we, if the number needs to be higher, where do we go with that then? What are your if you're thinking about potential clients, what are the things you'd focus on to improve the valuation?
Typically, I think it's 5 I concentrate on. I think the biggest one is the owner involvement. So if you're running a business, it could be very profitable. You could be making lots of money from it. But if you're involved in driving the pipeline, running the marketing, delivering some of the service, relationship with clients, it's you running the business. Everything's dependent on you, and that is the number one killer of a deal, or the number one killer of value. It's owner involvement. So one of the things that we will be looking at is how do we get the owner out of the business, and then that follows 2 and 3, which is you put internal processes in place. If you can do it, surely somebody else can do it. So let's just write down how you do it, and then train somebody and get someone else to do that, which then frees you up to then focus on the next area and the next area. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that then is software. So you've got your systems, you got your software, you're beginning to take the owner out of the business. And then the next thing is financials. So you need to be able to prove the figures you've got. You've got to be able to prove where the numbers are coming from. You need to be able to prove where the profits have been made. You need to be able to show and be able to handle any losses that have been made. And so all of those then build the value of your business. And then the final thing is sort of time frame, how long. So again, the more time you have to deal with these and move the business along. But it's really about, the owner, the systems, the processes, and making sure the financials stack up and can be shown to others that they stack up as well.
It's interesting what you say there, that the founder being totally involved with it really is a negative in the business in terms of the day-to-day operational setup of the business, because you say
it is if you're looking to sell it to anybody or to reduce your involvement, then you can't be involved. I mean, I guess the way I look at it, maybe it's not a great analogy, but I sort of look at it, when you're exiting your business, what you're trying to do is pick up the box, which is your asset, which is your business, and hand it to the next person, and then be able to step away. And so what you're really trying to do is build an asset or build a box that has everything in it, and it's all there. And the moment you hand it across to someone else, it'll still operate as it was before the other person took it on, but it's now something that can be handed across in a fairly easy way.
Right, and again, that comes back to you can't do that in a couple of months. If you I'm going to sell at the end of the year.
No.
If you got to replace yourself, and I do see a lot of business owners are exactly that. They're the main person. They're the contact. All the new sales come from their own network and black book, which clearly isn't worth that much if they're no longer on the scene.
Yeah, and you're not replacing them completely, because that's maybe the fear that business owners have. Well, I'll have no involvement. What am I going to do? It's not about replacing them. It's about taking them out of the day-to-day and allowing them to maybe look at higher value clients or look at some new areas that haven't been explored yet and do stuff that's probably more interesting than what they originally set the business up to do. And then equally, that can then be handed over probably after a period of time, but the core business operates without them. And any additional stuff they do on time, someone can be recruited in by a new owner in due course at their level, or it's just more interesting for them anyway. But also, I mean, the point we made earlier is that when you're getting exit ready, it doesn't mean you have to sell the business. You may get it to the valuation you want, and the owner says, okay, this is fine. I can go away for 6 months of every year. I'll keep the business. I know the value is exactly where it needs to be. And if I got an offer tomorrow, we're pretty much ready to go, and I can make the decision then whether I want to stay or go completely.
Interesting. I mean, I think you describing there that I've often thought, what's the difference between a profitable business and a sellable business? I think that's maybe it, because there are some businesses that are very profitable, quite nice, throw off quite a lot of cash.
Yeah, but if the profit has all been generated by you, then the moment you step away or you get ill or you're unavailable, then the profit will drop through the floor. And really what a buyer is buying is that consistency of profits for the next 3 to 5 years for them. That's what they're paying for. So what they want is they want the ability to be able to manage that and be able to deliver that once they've bought it from you. So if it's all dependent on the owner, yes, you can sell the business. If you speak to any business broker or M&A advisor, of course they can sell your business, but they might not sell it for the value that they should be selling it for you to get the most out of it. But also, you might have to stick around the business for a period of time afterwards and work for somebody else. And I think if you're a business owner, you've been working in your own business for 10 or 20 years, you want to minimize that earn-out period, or that period where you've got to work with the business to get the full amount of your sale value as much as possible. So the less involvement you have, then the less likely that earn-out period will be very long or very onerous, or it'll be such a small amount of sale value you can actually say, do you know what? I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah, just walk away should you choose to. Interesting. Let's talk about the types of buyers that exist. I mean, obviously generically across different sectors. So it's well known that there's some financial buyers, private equity, and there's more strategic buyers who are more maybe a bigger version of your own business. I mean, you've got some personal experience of private equity backed, owned company. Is that right?
Yeah, after I left the property business where we had the failed sale that we talked about earlier, I joined a marketing agency. It was about £40 million turnover, and it had been acquired by a private equity buyer, Bridgepoint Capital, 3 or 4 years beforehand. And so therefore I went from what was a very interesting, challenging and fun environment, which was, we've set up a business in Hong Kong, please collect the money. And my answer was, what business in Hong Kong, what bank account, what? To moving into a private equity environment where it was all about, we are exiting in X number of years' time. What's the budget for next year? Are we on the budget? What do our management accounts say? Why are we up? Why are we down? We've got our covenants to be reviewed in 3 months' time. How's our debt looking? Very, very organised, very financially driven. And if things weren't going to plan, then they'd say, well, we're going to remove that division. We're going to get rid of that person who's not performing. All very, very data-driven, all very driven by the finance team. So different environment, interesting for me personally in a slightly different way, but it just shows you the buyer wants to get their pound of flesh out of your business. So therefore, the easier you make it for them to buy the box off you with the minimum fuss, and then let them deal with it afterwards is really
I think
what you're after.
that's the point. Private equity, by definition, is an investment. It's a fund, often, that they themselves need to exit from as well. So they are certainly buying with exit in mind from day one. So it's quite different. In your experience, it really is focused on data, progress, numbers, making some, I guess, tough but necessary business decisions, if things aren't adding to the valuation, we'll potentially cut them out.
Yeah, they'll actually cut costs to make sure you hit the profit number.
Right.
Or you get a really good sales guy who delivers a profit number. They might even cut some costs to increase the profit, because then that might help the multiple and give them a higher value on exit. But it's a very different environment.
Having seen both, do you have a personal preference? If you were advising a business owner and you had a couple of offers, one was a private equity coming in, one was a strategic buyer, would you have a preference based on your own experiences?
I think it depends on the business owner selling the business, because some business owners want sort of a legacy. They want their employees to maybe work in a particular environment. So they might decide, I'm not going to sell to private equity. Others might go, I just want the money. They're offering the highest. Let me sell it to them. But, it can become quite strategic, and it depends on each individual buyer. And sometimes market conditions can play a part. So maybe PE buyers aren't around anymore, so you don't maybe have an option. So, that gets into slightly more strategic, more market-driven or buyer-driven decision-making, really.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a range of offers if you're selling a business, and you can pick and choose. One's offering a bit more, but it comes with some strings attached, and then sort of have that range. Which I think it's important at the end of the day to sort of create a market and have a range of potential acquirers.
Yeah, which is basically where you start bringing in your brokers, or you bring in your advisors early. So I would suggest about 12 months beforehand, so they can start giving you a picture of what the market looks like, who the buyers are, what things might be attractive to them, and also then you can make tweaks to your business to maneuver you into the right space to find the buyers you are maybe best suited for or want to find. So that's another sort of important part, is actually involving the sale advisors, the brokers, at a relatively early stage, so you can start to maneuver things into the right direction as early as you can.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm just thinking through this idea. I'm back to my kind of imaginary, but there's lots of them out there. Business owner 3 to 5 years away. He's sort of tuning into this and thinking, well, I'm kind of in that spot right now. And I'm a big believer in, assemble your team, and the team that you've currently got may or may not be sufficient for the next stage, which is hopefully a significant exit. So we've talked already about a good strategic, forward-thinking tax and accounting firm, a good wealth advisor who understands yourself, your family, your background, and what sort of an idealized future looks like. So brokers, M&A, investment banks, corporate finance. In your experience, if someone's starting from scratch, doesn't even know about these people, most business owners get emails all the time. If you've been in business for a while and you're making profit and the information is in the public domain, you get contacted regularly by people who say, I can sell your business, we can sell your business. Any thoughts about how you would begin to identify who are the better people you should engage with, who can actually help you, find buyers and sell your business? A quick pause. You might not be aware that this podcast is a passion project. It's born from my commitment to supporting entrepreneurs through the business stages of scaling up, selling, and then life on the other side. It's the same work we do at Capital Partners, our boutique wealth planning firm, which is dedicated to helping entrepreneurs to gain clarity around their money, their aspirations, and ultimately achieving financial peace of mind. With over 20 years' experience of working with business owners, our team brings deep insight, strategic thinking, and clarity to what can often be complex decisions. So what you're really looking for is a trusted advisor, someone who understands people like you and can offer thoughtful guidance at the intersection of business, family, money, and life. In other words, someone to act as your strategic thinking partner and your financial coach. So if that resonates, feel free to explore more. There's a link in the show notes to our website with tools and resources to support you on your journey. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
I guess it's trying to find the perfect accountant or lawyer or tax advisor or wealth manager. It's through relationships. It's maybe through testing, checking, doing a bit of a roadshow perhaps. But I think probably if you can work from a network of people that you have met or one of your trusted advisors. So, for example, there's a few M&A advisors and brokers that I speak to and I know reasonably well, and so probably I would put them in front of those first, because I think they're not interested in just the sale; they're interested in building relationships.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably what you do in your business.
Yeah.
It's what we try and do, and that's probably what the best professional advisors do. They're not just interested in the transaction; they're more interested in building relationships. So, there isn't a hard and fast rule. Maybe find someone who can be recommended to. Maybe find a few that seem to fit the bill. Do a bit of a fashion show with them, and have your checklist of what's important to you, and check them out on that basis. But
yeah, I think I agree. It's interesting, isn't it? We're in this now. We always will be sort of post-COVID environment where everyone went kind of through necessity, through digital and meeting by Zoom, etc. But thinking about it now, there's no real substitute for in-person meeting, because it is, at the end of the day, it's relationship business, isn't it? So it's the network. Speak to your current advisor that you might like, as you say, if somebody's working with you, Damian, and they're thinking about doing it, then you will put them in touch with. So somebody who's, I guess, passed your smell test, that they seem like a decent organization, decent company. They've worked with some other clients. That allow people to go and meet with them, ideally meet with them in person, and just get it's a gut feel, isn't it? So you trust your intuition. Do I want to work with these people? Do I think that I could be successful within the relationship? That's the route to take.
Yeah.
Good old fashioned word of mouth. Yeah.
And usually I think the better brokers, in my experience, are those who will be happy to have a chat to somebody on the exit journey, maybe even 12 months before they think there's a transaction happening. And if they're willing to have that conversation, put some time in, answer some questions, give you a bit of a steer, then I think that's a pretty good sign, because then they're building a relationship, and they'll expect that more often than not someone will come back to them then when it's time to try and find those buyers.
Makes sense. And the same would apply to legal advisors, lawyers. That's probably a bit closer to the transaction date, but again, it's word of mouth. Who else do you know? The M&A people probably know a lot of lawyers. You probably do as well. So I think that's something that I've learned in the last couple of years. Really important to kind of do your research, assemble your team way in advance. Some you need a long way in advance. Some you need kind of closer to the date. But don't be flapping around last minute and say, hey, I need to find a lawyer quickly to execute all the papers for the transaction. So
so
give yourself time.
Find your accountant.
Yeah,
early.
That's where we start.
So you can basically get that exit plan started. Tax advisors, I think, are quite important at the start. Put the options in front of you. Make sure you're ticking the boxes in terms of the easy tax planning and tax relief you can take advantage of. And then probably through the course of the 2 or 3 years, you'll probably need to go back and just review your tax planning and make sure it's still fit for purpose. Then you start later on looking for your and your wealth advisor is obviously important at the start as well. And then after that, it's about bringing the lawyers in close to the time, the M&A advisors, and that's probably the core of your team, which should get you across, say, the line.
Makes sense. I'm just sort of progressing that conversation. So you've begun to assemble your team, or if appropriate, your people that you currently work with. But you're getting close to that. I'm quite familiar now with this idea of the diligence that a buyer would undertake on a potential acquisition, and the concept of what I pick up is generically known as a data room. Just some information. So I don't know if you have much or any experience around that, but I guess you would have some experience in terms of adding to that data room. What are the things or the key documents that a buyer would expect to see? First of all, probably just explain what a data room actually is. That's my understanding of the term.
Yeah, so maybe I'd go back a bit further. Everything you do to get a sale away will revolve around the due diligence process.
Yeah.
And the due diligence process is basically the buyer coming in and looking at all of your documentation, which then underpins everything you've told them about the business. And what they're trying to find is that everything you've said to them true, is it factual, and then they're also looking for holes, or looking for problems, looking for potential issues that will come out and potentially cause them problems afterwards. So due diligence documents can be, we've got a little guide. It's got about 3 pages of likely due diligence documents that you would have or would need to have in place. So the data room is essentially you put all of your due diligence documents in this data room, which is basically like a database or a CRM system. You put all the information in, you give access to the buyer then goes in and then at their leisure work through all the documents, do their own review, come back with a list of questions, and hopefully then they're relatively easy questions to answer. Or you put some additional documents into the data room. So it's basically the facility to put everything in there and for a third party to come in and work through it with their lawyers, with their accountants, with their HR advisors, with their tax advisors, etc., etc., etc.
And it's on your 3-page list. I mean, I presume it's the financials predominantly, showing your last 2 or 3 sets of accounts.
Yeah, it's going to be all of your financials. Everything you can possibly think of will probably form part of that list. So all of your management accounts for the last probably 2 to 3 years, all of your statutory accounts going back 5 years, all of your budgets, cash flow forecasts. You'll need a whole suite of legal documents. So any documents you've got with your customers, with your suppliers. You'll have all of your HR in there. You'll have all your IT licenses. All of your tax returns, all your VAT returns going back years. So it's a huge number of documents, but what it's meant to show is that everything you've said stands up to scrutiny, and it also says that they can check and confirm that your contracts are watertight, that you own all of your IT equipment, that all the licenses with Microsoft are paid for, and Microsoft aren't suddenly going to pop up and ask for 5 years worth of license fees for 100 people. So it's very, very detailed. And again, it can vary depending on what sector you're in and what business you're in, but it'll cover all the finance, legal, HR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
It sounds like if you hadn't done it up until that point, there's a lot of work to put that together. The thing I often think about as well, and business owners have told me, in the meantime, you're still running a business. And you can't keep your eye off the ball because now you've got a buyer in mind, so you can't suddenly have a huge dip in revenue or profits. And inevitably, what you said, there's a load of documentation.
Yeah.
Most small businesses have, they've pretty much got all that data, but is it easily accessible, quickly and effectively? Probably not. It's going to take a bit of time to build that. So I'm guessing you probably recommend people begin to do, back to the magical 3 to 5 years, so begin to pull this data room together at an early stage, so you're not faffing around last minute when the due diligence people come in and ask for all the information. You've kind of got it 80-90% complete.
Yeah, that's sort of part of working the plan. If you've got a plan to put a data room together, then at a relatively early stage you start putting it in. Even 12 months ahead of time, you put in 80% of what you need, and you just keep adding to it over time. And again, going back to the actual exit process or the sale process, that's exactly how it works out. You've got your day job, and then you've also got this other job, which is putting together all of the final planning, all of the final bits and pieces. You may be in talks quite often with your M&A advisors. You might be out doing roadshows, presenting your business to potentially interested people. You will then be fielding some due diligence queries, perhaps with an interested buyer or two. So it's almost like working 2 jobs. So it's very, very stressful, very, very challenging. And the key thing as well is that typically as part of your exit process, you'll have done a forecast or you've done a budget 1, maybe 2 years out in front, because again, you'll try and get the most value out of your business. So you'll say, well, we're worth X amount today, but next year and the year after, we're going to have 2 stonking years because we've planned it out and we've put everything in place for that to happen. So if your numbers drop off this year or next year, that can change the value that you are negotiating with, or it can put a hole in it very, very quickly. So it does become quite stressful. You've got to keep the process going to get to the end, but you also have to make sure that the management team, the business is performing, because that forms a key part of the offer you're going to get for your business.
It's interesting. You used the word stressful there. I mean, I must, reflecting back on all the dozens and dozens of conversations I've had on this podcast, and I've spoke to advisors, and I've spoke to quite a lot of entrepreneurs who have exited, and not one said it was a nice and smooth and easy process. Every single one said, yeah, ranging from it was a bit stressful to, oh my God, it was the worst experience of my life. So that, I guess, is something else that you got to prepare for. Is you're going to go through months. It will be inevitably months and months of a process.
Yeah.
When you're just juggling so many other things. So you've probably worked with clients and helped them get through all that. So I think, having back to this idea of having, trusted advisors and people that you can reach out to and say, right, we need to find the accounts from the management accounts 3 years ago. Can you help me? Can we build this data room? Can we add to it? Because the whole thing is just very demanding, I think, and stressful.
Yeah, it is. And you might need to bring in some temporary support in certain areas to sort of free up some of the management team or the business owner themselves. But it's really important to make sure that the business carries on as is, because that can really deal a blow to your potential deal.
Sure.
But ultimately, hopefully, it'll be all worth it, because you get that life-changing sum of money at the end of the day, and that then allows you to retire on your yacht in the Mediterranean for the next 20 years.
If that's what you want to do. As it's been described to me, all you've done really is swap one asset for another. That's the key thing. You've got a business, you own a business which is worth £10 million, say, and now you've got 10 million liquid, and ignoring tax and everything else, and you don't have a business anymore.
Yeah,
you still get the same amount, but it's a different set of expectations, challenges, and opportunities, because things have changed. Quite a few of the people I've spoken to in the past, a couple in particular that I can think of, did talk about some personal challenges post exit. Have you seen that with the people that you've worked with and your sort of past experiences? Because for many people, their business is their life's work, and it's kind of the thing that often referred to as my baby. Sort of created it and brought it up, and now I no longer have it. Have you any thoughts on that, or any advice you would give to people who are going to plan for an exit, and then if you retire or then go and do something else? Any thoughts there?
I haven't had any experience of it myself, because the businesses that I've worked at have either not sold in some cases. In some cases,
one notably,
one very notably, they have sort of exited and sold and exited, but they've been on an earn out for 2 to 3 years, so that's kept them busy for a period of time. But actually, more recently, as I've gotten into this topic and into this area in more detail, it's become more obvious that it is an issue for many business owners, particularly those who sell out immediately, but also for those who finish their earn out and then go, what's next?
Right.
And I hadn't been aware of it, but the more I look into it, the more I find out more. It does seem to be an issue where your baby or your main business asset or the thing that's kept you busy for 10 years or 5 years or 25 years is suddenly gone. You don't need to get up in the morning to do it. You don't have any stress or any challenges. And maybe you don't have another innovative idea in mind or another plan to kick off again. So it does seem to be an issue where people lose their purpose, a bit depressed, a bit lost. So again, it's now something that I have brought into our process is do some planning ahead of time for what comes next, or how are you going to handle next, and that might involve a little bit of coaching, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I haven't quite worked out the details, but coaching could be a good idea, or just having a plan where you put it down on paper. What am I going to do? And I guess in some cases, forewarned is forearmed. But it could actually involve getting a bit of coaching and just making sure you're emotionally prepared for the whole change.
I agree. Kind of pre-exit coaching for sure if you can, but post-exit for those who want. I mean, intuitively, it just doesn't sound like a problem. You suddenly
that's it. Yeah,
you've got a huge amount of money. What are you worried about? And I think that is part of the problem. And others have said that to me. Everyone else around you says, I wish I had your problems.
But I think part of it is it's your purpose is gone. Maybe a lot of your friendships have come through business. Maybe a lot of the social things you did are sort of business related. And if you're out on the golf course on your own every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, maybe that's the big trigger.
Yeah.
So it does seem to be an issue. Maybe an issue that people are talking about more widely maybe than they used to, but
I think it's again useful, this concept of having a network, an informed network. So if they were speaking to you and you were helping somebody navigate through that successful exit, they may have asked you, well, who do you know can help me sell the business? Might be one thing. Who do you know anyone that could do all the legal work for me? Or you might be bringing that to them. And then if the need arises, down the line post exit and they say, I am struggling with a bit, I'm bored of playing golf by myself 3 times a week, I could do with just sitting down having a coffee with somebody. But again, if you were connected and knew a few people, and there are, again, look at past episodes of this podcast, you'll find some very, very helpful people. Not for everyone, but I think all roads again lead back to building a network and doing it way in advance for all the. You may or may not need all or some of the people, but knowing that you can have access to these people, I think, can be.
Yeah, it's almost like having a toolbox, being able to pull out the right people for the right client at the right time.
Yeah.
And so certainly that's something I've looked at. I know there's a book, an event I went recently, there's a book about how to plan and how prepare for an exit emotionally, so you don't end up burnt out or find yourself a little bit lost. I can give you the name afterwards. You can put it on there.
We'll put a link if you remember it. Put a link to it in the show notes. The challenge I've found is a lot of business owners, they don't think they're going to have a problem. They say, I don't need any coaching. I'm fine. I've been running a business for 20 years. I can deal with it. But it's it's very individual and very personal. And I think and doesn't apply to everyone. Some are absolutely happiest day of their life, and they're on the proverbial yacht sailing the Med, thinking it's the best time. And others are struggling. So I think building a network of people or organizations that can be called upon if needed, I think it's really, really important.
Yeah.
So Damian, you've created quite a lot of resource. Again, the aforementioned LinkedIn post that I see every day, which is great. I mean, it does seem to me that LinkedIn's really kind of evolved. It used to be, to me, just a terrible kind of recruitment place and getting all these sort of dodgy emails from recruiters. But now it seems to be a place where people are posting some valuable content for their particular niche. You mentioned your website. You've got some information about the diligence process, the data room. Is that available on your website, the information there?
Yeah, I'd probably point people in the first place to LinkedIn. So Damian Connolly, FCCA is my handle for LinkedIn.
Yeah, we'll put the links to that if people can find it easily. But yeah.
And then also we're building up our YouTube channel. So we're going to have as many videos as we can fit on there around being exit ready and a few other topics. So they're probably the best places to go for people interested in this topic.
No, I think that's great. And I, for one, as a business owner myself, I've been sort of checking those things out, and I think, interesting. I didn't know that. That's quite, it's valuable. So I think what you're doing is great. Producing this content, putting it all out there for free for people to engage with. So if they do want to learn a bit more about you, check out LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Check out your YouTube channel. We will post links, and they can learn a bit more about, because it is, as I say, it's quite a specific focus that you've got in the business. And it's like, you are an accountant, it's an accountancy business, but it seems to be a bit different to other accounting firms that I've seen in the past, because you really are in that, for those. It's not for everyone, but for those individuals who are this kind of, the famous, we'll keep repeating it, the 3 to 5 year.
Yeah.
And I'm beginning to think about it. It's definitely coming on my radar. And they just want to reach out and have a conversation with you. That would be, that would be helpful. Just thinking, as we this has been really, really helpful just to give I know it's a whistle stop tour through your experiences and your knowledge, but it's been very, very useful. Other than your content and your website, are there any other resources that you would recommend? Are there other books or anything you've come across that you find the business owners have found helpful, or are you more like, I don't read much, or I'm just, what's your view on resources people can learn more from?
Well, we have one more resource. We do have a guide about the process of selling your business, and it covers off in detail the whole due diligence process and a list of documents. There will be more coming on that, so give me a couple of months and we'll have a variety of those. In terms of other resources, I haven't really used any myself. I think experience is quite key. So it's my experience of actually having to go through the exit process with a business 3 times. As a job, and now working with some clients and getting them to plan the right way and getting them to do the right things. And it's also then having conversations with M&A advisors, listen to some of their discussions. That's really where I've come to think that this is a niche area, but it's an area that people don't really understand very well. So I think it needs to be explained a little bit more clearly in maybe plain English for them to understand what it is. It's a challenging process, but it's not non-negotiable. And also there are a lot of brokers in the marketplace, as you mentioned. A lot of people send you emails, but they're interested in selling the business, they're probably less interested in helping you get the most out of the business. And that's the area where I think is underserved. It's that there's lots of businesses that are relatively small, but with a bit of planning could be sold for a reasonable sum. And then there's a lot of businesses that maybe are sold and could have been sold for a lot higher sum with a bit of planning and a bit of time and effort put into it.
So yeah, and that makes sense to me as well. There's a million business books out there, and they, some are great, some are not. But I think that makes sense. Real life practical experiences, put it upon yourself just to go out, to connect, to have a cup of coffee, to meet up with people and learn more about it.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. That's an interesting point that you've raised. Not all, you call them business brokers. I mean, there's business brokers. They've got, a dozen different names. Some, the high end ones call themselves investment banks, the M&A, the corporate finance, like you said at the very beginning, there's lots of different types of accountants. And so there's lots of different types of these people. And I do think incentives matter. And if they get paid only to sell a business, if they just find a buyer, then, they are driven by that and inevitably commercially, and, fair enough. And others that will help you kind of nurture you a bit. You put a bit of time and effort into it and help you, identify what it is you want. And if it is, and often it is, to create greater enterprise value in your business, they'll sort of help you at least point out what you ought to be doing in the next little while. So a great resource is get out there, connect with people, meet with people, ask questions, see how you get on with them. That's probably kind of the school of real life. Is actually meeting people and identifying who you think is valuable to you on your own kind of entrepreneurial journey. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. So as I say, this has been a great conversation. I always ask everyone who comes on the podcast one question just to sort of wrap it up at the end. And it comes back to this old, magical word wealth and the concept of true wealth. You've had a lot of experience yourself commercially. You're advising clients. You've seen people make a lot of money, potentially lose a lot of money.
Yes, yeah.
But just reflecting that on your own circumstances, what's your own personal definition of true wealth?
I don't want to be cheesy about it, but I think it's probably the same as most other people would say. It's about having a bit of freedom. It's about being able to travel if and when and where I want. And probably more particularly, I think I'm quite keen to spend a few months in Australia every year and just have some sunshine. Because
that would be nice.
The rain isn't really what I was made for. I might be Irish, but the rain wasn't what I was made for. I've got to be honest.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And we're recording this on a day in the early summer where it's absolutely chucking down outside. Yeah. So the appeal of sitting on a beach in Australia, I can fully understand. But that makes sense. And maybe it is a bit of a cliche, but it to me it reinforces this idea. Whereas money's important, there's the impact and the potential for money. And I think I just think, without getting too cheesy myself, the human conditions, we seek freedom. We seek freedom of what we do, when we do it, who we do it with, and wealth does give you that. And I guess by engaging with people like you, other specialists, the degree of freedom could be enhanced. You might be able to travel more comfortably to Australia. Stay in a better.
You can turn left instead of right, or whatever. Whatever the direction is.
That sort of thing. So that's where the money side of wealth, true wealth, comes into it. But ultimately, to achieve, independence, freedom, travel, do whatever it is you want. So, Damian Connolly, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. And we will put links to your website, your LinkedIn, and encourage anyone who found this of interest to get in touch with you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.